G'day everyone, I'm going to show you how I show one of my classes how to spray paint using spray cans and pens onto a decking. So I bought these deckings from a company called Zart. You can buy them singly or you can buy them in bulk, which is a bit cheaper. There are a huge range of colours. I use sugar spray and I use paint pens, but I really do encourage the students to use any type of medium at all. So they can experiment with the spray cans, but then if they want to add something, they can. So I just want to go over our do's and don'ts in the room. So for example, everyone has to wear a mask. Everyone has an individual mask, and I get students to write their name on the mask, so when they're in and out of the drawer, they know which one's theirs. Sharing one is a bit gross, we don't do that. They need to make sure they're wearing an apron, so they're protecting a uniform. They need to consider the wind direction when they're outside and spraying. What happens is, because they're outside on the grass area and not on the decking, it can get windy. So if I'm spraying in a particular area and the wind is blowing from one side, the person beside them can get like that leftover spray. So I do encourage students to make sure that they're aware of the wind direction when they're spraying. They're never allowed to spray inside. They always have to spray outside because of just the health and safety aspect of spraying. Like I said, they need to spray over on the grass area because I have a decking outside my room, and that overspray does tend to have a bit of a build-up, so they have to spray on the grass area. It's got a little bit of cover, but you know, it's nice, it's beautiful days, and it's a great place to have your art lesson. Now, also spraying on any surface, also not spraying on any other surface than your own. So it's very tempting to walk past when you've got that bit of a spray can and spray something. I'll show you how I've got it set up. I've got a table with a box that students can work in, and it's a really big factor that they're making sure that they're doing the right thing. Done? This is how I set up my stations for my classes. I have 3 of these tables that I keep in an outside area, and I have the containers which are numbered, and I have containers of paint pens that are also numbered. So I divide my class into 6 groups, I think. So group 1 has the container that has the number 1 on it with the spray cans in, and group 1 also has the number 1 container that has the paint pens in. And that way it helps me at the end of the session to make sure all the colours are put away or nobody's taking anything. And it's easy to pack away as well because it's all the containers that can just sit nicely and be put away. The boxes I have, I just went to like a Mitre 10 and I just grabbed some big boxes from there. These are really good for the boards to go into. They can be, the boards can be stood up. The overspray of paint that comes off the cans can be a little bit contained within the boxes, and students can just turn the skateboard up around the other way so that they can get right down to the top or the bottom. Okay, it's a little thing, but I thought I'd just show you how to put a mask on. So I've bought masks with this little yellow band on the top, but any sort of mask, as long as it does the right thing, is fine to use. You take your 2 bands and you put them over your head. Very attractive, and then this just sits on top like so, and then I just spend the whole lesson walking around looking beautiful in my art room, but we're all doing the same thing, so it doesn't matter. So each of the students get given decking, and you can see it's in plastic. Depending on if students keep their decks or not, I often recycle them because sometimes they're beautiful and sometimes the kids, you know, don't do what they thought they would achieve. So I always get students to take their plastic off, and I get them to write their name on tape and tape it to their board. You never know, if a student finishes one side, then they can do the other side, or if they want to use it later, there's no big, I don't know this is on the plastic, but I'm just showing you, but there's no big dirty handwriting on there, so they can use either side. One of the questions I get asked by students is which side of the board do you spray on? If you want to spray on this side so that this is up at an angle, this actually sits flush against the wall. If you want to spray on the other side, then you can do that as well. And then what happens is the students, if they ever wanted to put the wheels on there, can actually stand on a blank side. So, you know, for me, it doesn't really matter, but it's just a thought that I put out there for my students. So I've just picked up 2 cans of paint. Now you'll hear a difference. One has quite a lot of pigment in there and one is quite empty. So this one took a moment to get started, and it's quite heavy and thick, whereas this one you can hear the difference. So this one is probably empty. Now the other thing you need to think about as well is when you get a new can of the Iron Lac sugar spray, and I buy my products from Zart, there is a safety mechanism in that. Childproof. Okay, this little piece just comes off and the lid gets sat onto that so it's ready to go. Okay, so one of the things I spoke about doing is getting an A2 piece of paper. An A2 piece of paper isn't big enough, you have to use A1. And I put the decking on a piece of paper and we just trace around it. Then the next thing they do is in their sketchbooks, you know, they've got their own design. Okay, I'm going to go really wild here and put a sun, and they think that's going to work. But what they have to do is they have to transpose this idea onto the actual shape. And when they start to do that, they might find that their design, doesn't fit on. They have to change it a little bit. This is a really good planning stage, because once they've drawn their piece that they want, I then get my students, if they're using stencils, to use a cutting mat. And this is a knife. This has a very distinct little blade on it, and it's got a little green bar on the top. When you're cutting, you have to make sure that the green bar is on the top, otherwise it tears your paper. And I put these under lock and key. So let's say they've created their stencil that they want to use. They can then put a piece of paper. They can go over to the light box if they wish, and they have to create a stencil for their piece if they wish. And I'll just show you how that cutting works. Making sure it's on the cutting mat, making sure the green line is forward, and they follow. I'm rushing to show you what it looks like. They rush that along, and then that just pops out. Now you need to think about where you put your stencil in your piece of paper, and this is just 130 GSM. This is like the colors that nobody wants, and this will get stuck into their sketchbook, because if you tend to put that on your board and you haven't left enough paper, when you spray, the overspray will go over the top. I like the overspray, but not everybody does. So when you're spraying, you need to make sure that your paper goes over the skateboard so you don't get the overspray if you don't want it. So we're nearly ready to start our spraying, and one of my students has just asked me about putting white underneath. I suggest you put the white underneath. It helps the brilliance of the other colours come out of for you when you go over that with your painting. Now, when you're starting to have a spray, what you can do is you need to make sure that you have a nice even flow over the board. So in order to get that started, let's just pretend this is a board. If you just stand and hold your paint in one place, you get a bit of a drip effect, which is nice, but that's not what you're after for your undercoat. So what you want to do is you want to spray from left to right, and then you get a nice even coat. Now you can see what I mean about this overspray everywhere. That's why we're in the cardboard and making sure we're aware of the wind and where other people are. You don't want to do your blotchy sort of thing unless you're after that particular effect. But for this exercise, you just want to go, I'm not going to spray on someone else's board, but you just want to go over that way. So I know I've spoken a lot about what to do and how to do it. So I thought I'd just show you a couple of ways in which to spray. But there is so much stuff on the net. You don't need me to make a video about how to spray. So what I've done is, I know I'm not wearing my mask, but if I put my mask on, you actually won't be able to understand what I'm saying. So I do know I should be wearing a mask. Now, for example, if you're wanting to get a color, and you just want to bring it down in your spray on your board, you can. Oops, quite coming out. And then you can soften it by coming away. You can work back into that, so work out your colour first. So there's a nice little gradation of colour. Okay, so doilies are great for using them in the art room. If you just put that over, now you will be on a flat surface and everything, but I'm showing you a demonstration so it's standing up. And then I'm going to take a colour and just go over that. It can look super awesome. Another one you can do is if you grab masking tape, let's say I put down a colour again, or you just want to leave the colour of the board. The board itself can be a really beautiful shape. Beautiful colour, and it's a lovely texture. So you can create a pattern with your masking tape, and then you can go over that. And then once it's dry, obviously mine's not dry, you can lift that off and that will create a pattern as well. Now the other thing you can do is you can make your work bleed. So depending on what sort of effect you want, you can have it run down, and then you can add another colour into that perhaps, and then you can add another colour. So you can get your colours running down. The other thing is, once you've created your stencils, you can take your stencil, put it on. You have to wait for it to dry, but you can use a stencil to create your designs. And yeah, they're just a few things to show you. Okay, so this is a piece that has started to be sprayed, and what you can see here are a few little droplets that have come out of the can. Now, some students really struggle with the fact that their piece of work is not perfect, but it really doesn't have to be. Spray painting, you just embrace the overspray, the little drips, the little bits and pieces that happen. It's not that neat, perfect piece of work that you can sit down and do with colored pencils. Okay, so we've finished doing our spraying with this particular colour, and what you now need to do is, because you don't know how long it's going to be to use the colour again, so you take your can and you go over your grass area, you turn it upside down, see the colour coming out, and then now there's no colour coming out. So what that does is that actually cleans the nozzles of your can. So you want to make sure you do that after you finished your colour. What I am going to show you are the steps that I get my students to go through when they're doing a folio. You don't have to do a folio, but at this level I do get them to do a folio. So they have to start with a page in their A3 sketchbooks, and they have to collect inspirational ideas. Where do you get the inspiration from? Anywhere at all. And we usually brainstorm where to get that sort of thing. I asked for 5 to 10 images, and then I asked for 3 or 4 of them to be annotated. So that's bringing in an art term, and explain to me why they've chose it. Do they like the colors? Do they like the shapes? Do they like the inspiration? Do they like the ideas? The next page they have to do is what I call the artist influence. They have to get at least 2 artists' ideas, work that they like. They have to include that work, and then they have to label it. So the name of the piece, where they got the piece, the name of the artist, the medium, and all that sort of stuff if they can find it. Then they have to make a comment about why they've chosen it. Do they like the message that they're trying to give? Do they like the shapes? And the inspiration and the artist influence, you can actually bring in your elements and principles of art and get them to write about that as well. The next word term that we include into our work is appropriation. So what might they appropriate from the work? They're not allowed to copy other people's work, but they can appropriate some of their ideas. And I sort of give my students, they're allowed to appropriate about 20% of another artist's work before it just completely comes out, and they're not allowed to use that idea. They have to come up with something else. So our inspiration and our artist influence equals their own ideas. So what this is drawing in their sketchbook an idea that they might want to do and adding a splash of colour. They need to factor in their composition, their balance, their focal points, all those good things in their artwork. And what this does is it starts them thinking about putting their ideas together and how it's going to work in that particular shape. What I then do is I give them a piece of A2 piece of paper, and I actually get a skateboard out and they trace around it so that they have to transpose this idea onto the skateboard. And that really gives them a bit of a push, because they've got this chubby skateboard here, and then they have to put it on a real skateboard. It does change the format of their picture sometimes, and they get an idea of where it's really got to go. The next one, we have a look at trialing. So trialing is when they go outside and they do their spraying. They're spraying colours, they're using the stencils that they've cut out. If they've cut out stencils, they're having a play with the paint pens and their stencils, and they're trialing. When they finish with the stencils, that all has to get stuck into their sketchbook, and that has to be annotated as well. So that's explaining what they've done, what they've used, what they've liked, what they didn't like. Here at school, we have a WWW and an EBI, what worked well and even better if. Now they're ready to spray. They get a little bit nervous about it, but once they start to see it work and the class starts to see work, it's actually a pretty cool project. Now, step 1, step 2, step 3, they have to photograph. That's a picture of a camera. They have to photograph what they're doing. They can use their devices or their phones, depending on what your school allows. They have to stick their steps in and they have to annotate what they're doing. So again, that's what worked, what didn't work, how they're going with things, what they're liking, what they don't like. Now, the final piece is actually taking a photo of their skateboard itself, sticking it in, and then they have to do a written evaluation. I give my class a set of, 20 questions or so, but they don't have to do them all. They can go through and find questions that are relevant to their own piece of work, and then they can answer some of those.